The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Selene almost missed it. She was balancing Rowan on her hip, while Cale pulled everything out of the kitchen drawer. Spoons, a rubber band, a pen cap he immediately tried to eat, and the envelope slid under the door like it was embarrassed to be there. She put Rowan down. He immediately crawled toward Sale to steal the pen cap. She let them negotiate it and picked up the envelope. No return address, just her name, written in handwriting she recognized the way you recognize a scar. Not because you look at it often, but because you know exactly where it is. She set it on the counter. She made breakfast. She fed the boys, wiped down the table twice, changed Rowan's shirt because he had opinions about oatmeal that he expressed physically. She did all of this before she opened the envelope. She was very good at finishing things before she allowed herself to fall apart. The letter was short. Alaric Voss had never been a man who used extra words. It said the kingdom had learned about the boys. It said he wanted to discuss what came next. It said, and this was the part she read 3 times, that she was not obligated to come, but he was asking. She folded it. Put it in the drawer under the spoons. Cale looked up at her from the floor. He had the particular stillness of a child who understood more than he should. He watched her the way a small judge watches a witness. She looked back at him. "We're going on a trip," she said. Cale looked down at the spoon in his hand, considered it, then held it up to Rowan, who accepted it immediately, and hit the floor with it. She took that as agreement. The journey was 3 days east by carriage, which meant 3 days of Rowan asking questions in the form of pointing at things and saying a sound that meant something different every time. Cale slept, mostly. Selene looked out the window and did not think about what she was doing. Thinking about it would not change it. She had already decided. She had decided the morning she found out she was pregnant, actually. Not to go back. Not to ask for anything. But to make sure, someday, that the boys knew where they came from. A name was not a relationship. It was just information. Everyone deserved accurate information about themselves. That was what she told herself. She was mostly convinced. The kingdom gates looked the same. Larger in her memory, somehow, she had built them up over 3 years into something more imposing than they were. In reality, they were just stone and iron. The guard on duty had a young face and nervous hands, and he looked at her like she was a problem someone else had caused. She waited. He made the sensible decision. The castle appeared at the top of the hill, the way it always had, like something that expected to be looked at. She did not feel what she expected to feel. She expected dread, or anger, or the specific grief of returning to a place that had asked you to leave. What she felt instead was tired. She had been tired for 3 years. The castle just confirmed it. Alaric was in a war council when it happened. He was mid-sentence, something about eastern border supply routes, when something shifted in his chest. It was not a dramatic sensation. It felt like a compass needle being pulled, like a room he had not entered in a long time suddenly had a light on inside it. He finished his sentence. He dismissed the council 8 minutes early, which was unusual enough that his second-in-command gave him a look. He did not explain himself. He walked through 3 corridors and 1 long gallery until he reached the east wing, and then he stopped, because she was there. She had 1 boy on her hip and 1 by the hand. Both children looked at him the way children look at someone they have been told about, like he was a story they already knew, and they were simply checking the illustrations against the text. The boy on her hip had his father's jaw and his mother's patience, and the other one, the one with the bright, watching eyes, had both of their stubbornness stacked in a very small body. Selene turned. 3 years lived in the space between one breath and the next. She said, "They have your eyes." Then she walked past him. And nothing. He stood in the corridor for longer than a king should stand in a corridor doing nothing. Then he went back to his study and sat at his desk and looked at the wall. The bond, the thing he had spent 3 years deciding not to think about, was fully awake now, and it was not quiet about it. It was like a fire someone had banked down to coals that suddenly had air again. He had forgotten, or told himself he had forgotten, what it felt like to have a fated mate in the same building. He had not forgotten. He had just become very disciplined about what he allowed himself to remember. His wife found him there, Celeste Wren Voss, who had been Luna of the kingdom for 3 years, who managed his court with the precision of someone who had studied for an exam and passed it perfectly without loving the subject. She stood in the doorway and looked at him with the expression she used when she was deciding how much she was willing to say. "She's here," Celeste said. "I know. The boys are. I know." A silence. A specific kind of silence, which was the silence of a woman who had made a reasonable agreement and was now watching the thing she had agreed to not account for walk through the door. "I want to speak with her," Celeste said, "before you do anything." He looked up. "Celeste. That's not a question, Alaric." She said it quietly, which was how she said everything that was not negotiable. Then she left. Celeste arrived at Selene's guest chambers that evening, with 2 cups of tea she had poured herself. No herald, no warning. Just a knock, and then the door, and then Celeste sitting down in the chair across from Selene, before anyone had agreed that was acceptable. Selene looked at her. Celeste put 1 cup in front of her and held the other. "I want to understand something," Celeste said. "Not what he owes you, not what the law says, what you actually want. When you came here, what were you hoping to leave with?" A long silence. Rowan was asleep in the next room. Cale was awake, probably. Cale was always awake. Selene said, "A name, that's all. I want them to have his name. They deserve to know where they come from. I am not here to take anything from you. I am not here for him. I want my sons to grow up knowing who they are, and then I would like to go home." Celeste looked at her for a long moment. Then she set down her tea very carefully, like she was buying herself a second to feel something privately before she put it away. "That's smaller than I expected," Celeste said. "I know," Selene said. "And more than he deserves." "Also yes." Celeste almost smiled. It was a tired smile, the kind that lives at the edge of much older feelings. She picked up her tea again. They sat together in a silence that was not comfortable, exactly, but was at least honest. That was more than most of Celeste's conversations were, lately. Alaric asked for an audience the next morning. Selene granted it the way you grant something you have decided is not a threat, with full control of the terms. She sat across from him in the formal chamber and watched him try every version of himself he had: the king, the apologetic man, the alpha who had made a mistake and knew it. She watched each one arrive and find no purchase. She was not cold. Cold implied she was withholding something warm. She was simply finished with a particular kind of wanting, and that made her very steady. He said everything he had probably rehearsed. He said he had been wrong. He said the kingdom had needed the alliance, and his father had been sick, and the timing had been, and here he stopped, because he was not a man who made bad excuses, and he knew a bad excuse when he was building one. He said, "I know that none of that is enough." "No," she said, "it isn't. I want to be part of their lives." "That is a decision that will be made slowly," she said, "based on what you actually do, not what you say in this room." He looked at her the way people look at someone when they are realizing, slowly, that they are not going to be forgiven today. Not yet, maybe not for a long time, and the person they are looking at is not withholding forgiveness to punish them. They simply haven't earned it yet, and there is no shortcut. He said her name, just her name, no title, no formality, just Selene. She stood up, smoothed her jacket, walked out. The court had opinions. Courts always had opinions. 2 factions formed within days. The traditionalists, who read the old laws and pointed out that a mate bond superseded a political marriage when there were heirs involved. The political alliance, who pointed out that the Wren Treaty had 17 binding clauses, and dissolving the marriage would affect grain supply to 3 provinces. Both factions arrived at Alaric's door with documents. He read them all. He slept very little. He went to the training yard at 2 in the morning, on the 5th night, because he had run out of things to read, and his body needed to do something with what was inside it. He hit the practice dummy until his knuckles were split. Then he sat on the ground because his legs asked him to. Then he stayed there until the cold made it unreasonable. He did not say anything. There was no one to say it to. He thought about a girl who had stood in front of him 3 years ago and waited for him to choose her, and he had looked at the treaty his father had spent 2 years building, and he had said what he said. He had told himself it was duty. He had told himself it was necessary. He had told himself a lot of things in 3 years, and none of them had ever quite settled. He had a kingdom, he had an alliance, he had a marriage that was polite and functional, and never once felt like standing in the same room as someone and being known. What he had given up to have all of that was sitting in the East Wing, with 2 boys he had never met until yesterday, and she didn't need him, and that was somehow the worst part. He had expected need, he had expected anger, something that required managing. She was just finished. He sat on the cold ground and looked at his split knuckles and thought, this is what you chose. This is what choosing looks like after 3 years. Then he got up, went inside, signed the document that recognized Cale and Rowan as his heirs. Not because it helped him, because it was right. Celeste left on a Thursday. She did it the way she did most things, efficiently, and on her own terms. She had spent the last 2 weeks not crying and doing mathematics, and the mathematics had produced a renegotiated treaty that was actually better for her family than the original, which meant she had turned 3 years of a complicated life into a net gain. She was extremely good at her job. She said goodbye to Selene on Wednesday evening. They had, over the past 2 weeks, developed a strange and unlikely respect for each other, the respect of 2 people who had been handed the same situation from different sides and had both handled it with more dignity than the situation deserved. You didn't have to come back here, Celeste said. My sons did, Selene said. Celeste nodded. Then she did something Selene had not expected. She reached out and briefly pressed her hand over Selene's. 1 second. Then she let go and straightened her jacket, and that was that. She did not say goodbye to Alaric. She left him a note. He read it 3 times. He kept it in the drawer under his own desk, under documents that were easier to look at. Alaric met his sons for the first time, properly, alone, with no audience, on a Saturday morning in his own study. Selene left them there, her idea. Alaric had not known what to do with the generosity of that. Rowan broke a decorative vase 4 minutes in. He managed it with the specific efficiency of a child who has a gift and has found an opportunity to use it. The vase was ceramic, blue, and had been a diplomatic gift from someone Alaric could not remember. It hit the floor in 4 pieces. Rowan looked at the pieces, looked at Alaric. His expression said, that happens. Cale looked at Alaric. His expression said, what are you going to do about it? Alaric looked at his son, at this small, watchful, completely unimpressed child, and then he sat on the floor. He did not call for staff. He picked up one of the pieces. Cale, after a moment of evaluation, sat down across from him. Rowan sat between them and began arranging the pieces by size, which was either very intelligent or completely random, and Alaric could not tell which. They stayed on the floor for 40 minutes. Nobody said very much. Alaric learned that Cale communicated primarily through eye contact, and that Rowan communicated primarily through noise and motion, and that between them, they were a complete sentence, in a language he was going to have to learn. He thought, I have 3 years of floor to make up for. I should start now. 3 months passed. The kingdom adjusted, the way kingdoms do, slowly, and with a lot of talking. The new arrangements settled into something that was not a fairy tale, and not a disaster, which is what most real things become. On a Thursday afternoon, Selene sat in the courtyard and watched Alaric chase Rowan across the grass. Rowan had taken something he should not have, a seal probably, or a pen, or one of the many objects he collected without asking, and Alaric was losing the chase comprehensively. The boy was small, but he was fast, and he had strong opinions about the objects he had chosen to keep. 2 members of the royal guard were standing at the courtyard wall, pretending very hard that they were not watching their king be defeated by a 3-year-old. Cale was sitting beside Selene. He watched his father and his brother with the expression of a senior advisor reviewing a report. He's slow, Cale said. He's learning, Selene said. Rowan shrieked with the joy of winning, and Alaric stopped running and put his hands on his knees and looked up. From across the courtyard his eyes found hers, the way they always had, the way they apparently still did. She looked back. She did not look away. The bond, 3 years pressed down, 3 months awake, patient in the way that only things with no deadline can be patient, sat in the space between them and did what it had always done. It waited, And this time, neither of them walked away.